All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. We're excited to have a webinar today on the restoration process for some of the advanced hardwood biofuels demonstration sites. My name is Noelle Hart. I am a member of the extension team at Advanced Hardwood Biofuels. And in our experience on the extension team, when we talk to farmers, when we talk to landowners, or when we're out in the general community, people ask us, how hard is it to get rid of the trees? There are people that have grown poplar in the past and had a bad experience. They were growing them for pulp, usually, so they were growing much larger trees, but it is a concern that we've had from people. If they're gonna start trying poplar, what would happen if they changed their mind? So today we're gonna hear about how the restoration process works, and if you did want to go back from a short rotation coppice poplar system to conventional agriculture, what would that look like? How much is involved? So we're lucky to have with us today Rick Stonex and Rick Shuren, who work for GreenWood Resources, and they were heavily involved in the restoration process at our demonstration sites, and they're going to be telling us today about their experience. We're also going to be hearing from a couple of the landowners and farmers who owned the demonstration lands or are farming the demonstration lands in a video, so look forward to that. If you have questions as we go along, we're going to use the chat window to collect questions. So on the bottom of your screen, or perhaps at the top if you mouse over, there's a little balloon that says chat. If you click on that, you can type in questions. And at the end, Rick and Rich will address your questions. And if you have questions for me, I will also keep an eye on the chat window. So at this point, I will pass it over to Rick and Rich. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. This is Rich Shuren. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Noelle, for that wonderful introduction. We do want to go ahead and move ahead here, and my slides are not advancing. Are my slides not advancing? This is quite interesting.
Perhaps try going out of presentation mode and then back into presentation mode.
I'm trying to see what might happen. That doesn't work. Oh, there we go. Okay, now we're back. All right, so the AHB project was originally initiated in 2012. We planted our first demonstration farms in 2012. The overall objective at that time was to create a biofuels industry for the Pacific Northwest that would operate regionally to provide biofuels that are essentially indistinguishable from petroleum-based biofuels and could readily be blended into the existing infrastructure of the oil-based fuel industry. The basis was to use hybrid poplar as the feedstock for the conversion process, and the objective of GreenWood as the feedstock partner was to look at the whole delivery system, growing system from the ground up to delivery to the biofuel, look at all the risks and mitigate those risks along the supply chain, and essentially demonstrate the viability of the whole system from growing to delivery to the biofuels conversion facility. We obviously didn't do this alone. We have a very capable set of partners. The project was led by the University of Washington, Rick Gustafson and his team. And we also have a large number of academic and industry partners that you can see showing up on the screen here. So we thank each of them for their contributions to the project as well. As I indicated, we did plant 4 demonstration farms. The first 2 were planted in 2012. The Jefferson, Oregon farm was planted in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, south of Salem. Again, 85 acres, about 11 clonal varieties. The site in Idaho, the upper panhandle of Idaho, was also planted in 2012, represented 65 acres and 7 clonal varieties. The following season, we planted the additional 2 demonstration farms, one in Pilchuck, Washington, north of Seattle, 98 acres and 10 clones. And then one down in Clarksburg, California, in the Delta lands, just south of Sacramento a little bit. And that was planted with 9 clones and represented about 50 acres. And then not shown on this map was a project that we collaborated with the Integrated Biomass Supply Systems, AFRICAP, IBIS, that was led by Tim Riles at the University of Tennessee. And we actually planted a 56-acre site near Columbus, Mississippi, which is only a short distance from Mississippi State University. So we'll be showing some slides and video from each of these sites. And just to give you a status update on them, the Jefferson, Oregon site was harvested about a year ago. We started harvesting, and it was restored in August of last year. The Hayden, Idaho site was harvested in July of last year and restored in August through early September. The Columbus site, again, not shown on the map here, but still a viable site, was harvested in December of 2017, and restoration is taking place there even as we speak. And we do have some video we'll show of that here in just a few moments. The Clarksburg site in the delta of the Sacramento Valley has actually been returned to the landowner as is. They are going to conduct the tree removal, harvest and tree removal on their own. And during a video interview that we have available during this presentation, they'll describe what they're going to be doing with their site. And finally, the Pilchuck, Washington site, restoration will take place later this summer after we harvest the trees in late spring. Okay, so the question of the hour, and the reason we're presenting this webinar, and Noelle framed the question very well as to how to get rid of poplars, is how do you get from here, a vibrant, thriving stand of 3-year-old hybrid poplars, to here, a site that's ready to receive a crop that is being grown and turned back into conventional agriculture. And so to step us through all of that process, I'm going to turn it over to Rick Stonex.
Yes, good morning to you. There's a couple general objectives in taking a poplar site and converting it back to another site, and then there's some quantifications that drive the process. So one of the primary objectives, because poplar resprouts so voraciously, is to prevent that from happening, or to prevent it from continually happening and have poplar grow up in the midst of your cornfield or your walnut orchard or whatever you might have. The other one is to take the woody debris below ground biomass, is primarily what we're concerned with after harvest, and break it, accelerate the decomposition of that and convert it into soil, basically. So the things that drive the process is, one, what's your next land use or perceived land use or use is. Timing of the operations, whether you are working winter months, summer months, on that, a lot of that involves how to prevent the regrowth. How much time you have, whether you have a short turnaround or whether you have months or years, makes a big difference in the process. And what your local resources are as far as machinery, equipment, capabilities to help do that process. So for restoration, the first step, of course, is to harvest the trees. That removes your above ground biomass and gives you less to deal with. In the pictures in this processes we're going to use and show you, we did not remove all the above ground biomass on the site, so it's mixed and matched between stumps and standing trees. So, as a general process, we'll mulch or grind the stumps and break the woody debris down into smaller amounts that can be organic or can be decomposed in natural state naturally by microorganisms and weather conditions. Use some type of conventional agricultural equipment to smooth the field out and prepare it for whatever type of crop is going in next. And treat for resprouts when and if necessary. For mulching and grinding equipment, there's we broke it down into several different categories and basically horsepower driven. So you have dedicated large machinery, and Prenoth and Fecon are a couple of varieties. There's Gyrotrax. There's a number of them available on the market. They're generally fairly high horsepower, front mounted. They can be hydraulic or direct drive. The hydraulic capacities for these mulching heads are 60 gallons a minute and up. They've got to be pretty high, more than 100 gallons a minute a lot of times.
Yep.
Some of them can work as deep as 16 inches into the soil, and they're quite expensive. So there's mid-size equipment that are mounted on a tractor or another power carrier, 140 horse, maybe 200, 250 horse, and they can generally 3-point mounted. You can find some that are mounted on a front end type loader or a mid-size, mid-horsepower machine too. A logging skidder, there's some that are attachment with that if they have enough hydraulic capacity. And they're generally mid-range pricing, if you want to call it that. They're not as expensive as a purpose-built 500 plus horsepower machine. And then there's small equipment, typically skid steers, and there's quite a variety of manufacturers, those, and they can be tracks or wheels. They've got different types of drum heads. The one pictured here was used at the Columbus, Mississippi site. And again, lower horsepower, lower cost. These machines typically do not go deep into the soil. They're limited by skid plates on the machines, or you have to do, or skid plates on the heads. With modifications of the heads, that probably can be adjusted, but at that lower horsepower, they just don't, a large amount of soil just bogs them down, so they aren't going to work real deep. Other equipment used in the restoration process is conventional ag equipment, or logging equipment, land clearing. So they can be powered. There are multiple ways to be powered. The advantage of using conventional ag equipment is you get large implements, and so you can cover a lot more acres in a single pass. The disadvantage is you don't do as fine a job of disking as a mulching type machine, so you end up doing more passes. So that's where it depends on what's available locally and what your landowners or future users are comfortable using. It can be mix and match between mulching and conventional ag equipment. The dozer pictured with the brush blade and the shanks there can actually go down and clean the roots and stuff, turn them over on the surface. Won't chop them up. You'll have to do something more for the woody debris. So, and as you finish up, you will use finer, smaller disc and harrows, and potentially use a land plane for leveling the site, depending on the crop that you have for the future use. So in Columbus, Mississippi, this first picture is we're using a skid steer and a mulching head. The contractor is removing some standing trees and lots of stump rows. It was about 20 acres of standing trees and 30 acres of harvested stumps when he's working through that. So it'll be followed up with conventional ag equipment. This is a tractor mounted, narrower mulching equipment that goes quite deep into the soil, and it's fairly slow moving, relatively expensive, but does a really nice job. You'll see some finished pictures of that. Here's the Prenoth, the larger machine, the 800, taking down 3-year-old trees that grew quite well in Hayden, Idaho. And that stand was partially harvested and partially not harvested due to some harvesting processes, and need to move the harvester machine elsewhere. But it did a great job of taking the machines down, grinding them up. Led to multiple passes then, one to take the trees down, one to remove the stumps, and then one to grind into the soil.
So here's a video of the Jefferson site. There is no sound with this video, so don't turn up your speakers, but you can see some of the aerial shots of the coppice regrowth after harvest and the machines working in the field. This is a medium horsepower tractor with the mulching machine as a 3-point implement. He's taking down the coppice and getting a couple inches into the soil. And then that's followed up by the larger Raptor 800 machine that does the actual grinding to, in this case, down to about 9 or 10 inches. And then here's a comparison shot of the coppice versus the nearly finished product for restoration by the machines.
And Jefferson, the final step in the restoration was multiple passes. Excuse me, I went too fast. Multiple passes with a field disc and then a harrow like this until it was suitable for planting. So that was last September. December, wheat was growing. So he planted wheat in October. The farmer will later on a video, but is quite happy with the process. So.
My name is Aaron Schumacher. I farm here in all around the property here in Jefferson where they have the forestry project. I raise all kinds of different crops. I raise peppermint for oil. I raise grass seed. I raise wheat. I raise a bunch of specialty seeds like brassicas, that kind of stuff. So I have lots of options. And I liked watching the harvest. I was pretty impressed that we use similar equipment to forage harvest some of our crops, and to see actual trees going through that piece of equipment was pretty impressive. When I came in to clean it up to farm, we had a lot of extra woody debris to deal with, and they did a really good job of grinding up all the stumps. I think all the material is small enough now that I never had any problem with my conventional tillage equipment going through it afterwards. My plan is to harvest the wheat. We should be able to mow off the stubble, and then we'll turn it over. We'll probably mow board plow to help bury more of the wood fiber so it breaks down faster.
So as a farmer, what would it take for you to want to grow something like poplar?
It would just be whether it was, profitable, whether a guy could do it that way, and also you're talking about tying up your ground for a considerably large amount of longer term to where you're, whether that would be something that you could afford to do or not.
Well, my name is Rob Miller. I'm from a company called Mount Jefferson Farms. I am the owner of this property here and came to be involved with it because I was familiar with the parties, GreenWood Resources, and I have an agriculture and a forestry background, and we've grown poplars since 1967.
So what did you grow on this site before grew poplar?
The site here had grass seed on it, it had peppermint on it, corn for the North Pack cannery, beans, wheat. Those were the main crops that preceded the poplars.
How do you feel about poplar trees?
We'd really like to continue growing them. We enjoyed doing it. It used all of the farming practices and expertise that we have. In my own case, it tied in with this lumber background, timber background, greenhouse background, and in my own case, genetic background.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about GreenWood's work restoring this field and what they did?
It looks really, really good. We're going to have to wait, through the next year to really determine it. But I give them an incredible amount of credit, Rick Stonex in particular, because it was a very difficult project to take this amount of biomass and get rid of it quickly, so somebody like Aaron Schumacher can come in with his expertise and make it seamless. And it looks like maybe that's been accomplished. I'm just thrilled to death that we could do this, and I hope it continues on, and I hope we do it again.
So Hayden restoration occurred about the same time as Jefferson last fall, late summer, excuse me. There, the soils were a lot finer. As you can see, became quite the dust bowl. Actually, I had to shut down a couple times. There's a residential development was downwind of it that was getting excessive dust. So that's the Prenoth Raptor 800 working in the dust cloud to the right there. Underneath this pivot irrigation, that was put in post poplar and restoration and for the crops going forward on this particular piece of property. You can see the mounded soil strips that were down the tree rows, and that was from the tractor with the rear mounted mulcher that we saw in an earlier slide, and it kind of left those hilled with a it's got kind of a shielded mulcher, and so at least kind of a hill back behind. And then on the right, its stuff's been leveled out with the disc since then. So
This is the Columbus site with the small equipment operating. Do you want to say something?
So coppice control is a concern, or resprouting control. When you harvest a stand, you not only have stumps that resprout and you have roots that resprout, but you also have chunks of debris. If there's any harvesting, you aren't going to have 100% of the trees are going to pick up. Those buried chunks of trees and limbs have potential ability to resprout. So the one way to control it is herbicide application. With experience dealing with this on a longer rotation poplar, what happens when you have chunks of wood buried, they tend to resprout at different times. So an herbicide application, if you're going to use that solely to control the resprouting, you might end up having to do a couple applications because the timing and resprouting varies between stumps, roots, and buried pieces of material. But typical agricultural equipment, you can spray it with whatever chemicals, used in your area. It's pretty easy to kill, but you do have to let it green up. Additional disking or mechanically pulverizing.
My name is Robert.
I jumped ahead. Sorry about that. Both the Hayden and the Jefferson sites that have got restoration completed on, we did no herbicide control for resprouting. Both of the climate in the Northwest and both those sites is relatively dry in the summer, late summer months. So if you pulverize the material and you beat it to death to small enough pieces, what little bit does sprout quickly exhausts its available moisture and dies. So that's probably not going to be the case if you're doing a winter restoration. When you keep stuff ground in the soil, you will tend to get resprouting in the spring. Different, if you're in the Southeast where you have moisture in the summer months. We assume in Columbus that even though we're mulching and we're going to work the ground pretty hard with the disc, we're assuming at least one herbicide application before he plants the soybeans or whatever crop he puts in. So, yeah.
Okay. So you saw that previously that we have actually turned back the Clarksburg, California site to the landowner. And so down there in a previous visit, some people from the AHB team were actually interviewed the folks there. And so here are their comments about what they're going to be doing with their project or their property.
My name is Robert Kirkland Jr. And when this project was in the planning stages, and had several meetings with folks that were looking for the experimental plots. And after numerous meetings, we decided that it was a good match, not only for our family, but for what they were looking for the experiment.
What attracted you to the project?
That it was an alternate crop that farmers could use to make additional income. And my family had always been experimenters. My ancestors actually grew hops in this area.
You like to experiment.
Yes, we do like to experiment.
So go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Bobby Kirkland III, and I was basically out here taking care of the trees, and I'll be out here for the removal of them too. Pretty much everything that's happened was a learning experience for me.
What was the most surprising thing to you?
How fast they grew. Once they cut them the first time, it was amazing how fast they grew back the second time.
Why did you guys want to take over the lease from GreenWood and do the final harvests and restorations yourselves?
So one of my biggest purposes is I know I can get the ground back to where we need it.
What's your plan?
So what we'll do is I'll bring in a dozer with what they call a brush rake on it. So the dozer will come in, but the blade actually won't go into the ground. But this brush rake sits on the front of the dozer and it's got these teeth that go in. And basically what it'll do, it'll pull the roots up out of the ground without disturbing too much of the topsoil and moving a lot of dirt around. So we'll push them all out, probably put them into big piles. Whether we're going to burn them or chip them, we're not sure yet. But that's the plan so far. I tried to base a lot of it off of walnut tree removal or almond tree removal. The only difference out here that we're dealing with is we have a lot more trees closer together, so you're dealing with a lot more trees per acre.
So what's your thoughts on the future of biofuels and biochemicals from poplars?
I do think there's a future there. It's obvious that we can grow it. If we can find a market, hopefully they can stay. I think there has been a lot of knowledge gained. Whether it's used today or not, again, that's up to the markets.
So you heard the comments there from both Bobby Jr. and his son. They will be bringing in some pretty heavy equipment to essentially extract the trees from the soil and get some of the roots as well as the stumps. So that's where we stand at this point in time with the project. What are we looking at in the next few months? The project officially ends August 31st. What are we looking at? Well, we are going to restore the Pilchuck site this year. Actual dates are up in the air because we have yet to harvest, and that will take place later this spring. Good possibility that we'll revisit the Clarksburg site. Our interest is in observing and documenting the process that they're using to restore the site and get it back to the condition they want it. So we may be back down there photographing and talking to the Kirklands and possibly the equipment operators as well to see how well that process is going. All right. I think that's the end of our official presentation. I'm going to go ahead and open the chat window here, and we can see if there are questions. Let's see. How much does soil type impact the approach and the equipment you use for restoration? Rick, you want to take a stab at that?
Soil type and moisture. If you're going to deep till and mulch with those type of machines, as you can see, if it's really dry, you can create a lot of dust, which does create problems. But so the operators have said they like to find that sweet point. They don't want it soaking wet standing water. It's a lot more weight and stuff for them to deal with, and it wastes horsepower in essence.
Yeah.
So it affects timing of your restoration. Most of the equipment is impervious to soil type. In fact, the Prenoth Raptor,
yes,
he also uses that machine to downsize rock and logging roads.
Yeah.
So he'll take 12-inch into 2 passes, 12-inch minus, and create 3-inch minus. So it's pretty much indestructible on with depending on which head you have. So
yeah, that's an amazing machine.
If that answers your question, Tim.
Yeah, the combination of soil moisture and soil type. Obviously, if it's too wet and you've got a really heavy clay soil, you're just going to gum everything up and not grind much of anything except kind of just pass it through and lay it back on the ground. The soils over in Boardman, when they did restoration of the tree farm, again using very similar equipment, in fact identical equipment to the Raptor 800, they were over there for a large period of time across a lot of different sets of moisture contents, and the light sandy soils there lent themselves very well to a wider operating range for them to be able to take down trees and grind up stumps.
Another comment that's on there is the Columbus site with the small skid steer, just for your information, because it's a one-day plane ride away and a one-day plane ride back, we haven't sat there and observed the restoration. And the particular part the machine was working in was a very poor performing variety. He did run through trees, as you saw pictured elsewhere, that were typical size of the 3-year-old trees here. It was only 2-year-old from harvest, so it's a little younger site. But the machine did get challenged with some larger trees in other areas of the project. We just weren't there to photograph it. That the contractor's gotten through some of that. He's about 60% done with the project now. So
okay. Did soil nutrients or other properties change before planting poplar to after removing the poplar? Physical soil properties probably didn't change all that much. Perhaps a slight increase in organic matter from some of the woody debris. We're in the process of accumulating pre-plant versus post-restoration soil results now, and have a report that's going to be coming out very soon. It does appear that there is some drop in nitrogen in the soil and may require some soil amendments to bring it back up to pre-plant condition. Other nutrients, we're still studying the impact of it. And we have those results only from Jefferson and Hayden. We are going to collect soil samples from the Clarksburg site and from the Pilchuck sites post-restoration to compare with results or analyses that were done before the poplars were planted. And once that's done, we'll round out the report and include it with the updated final report for the project.
So on the Jefferson site, part of the restoration process, we did put nitrogen on. Before we done soil testing, not as a result of reduced nitrogen, but to try to accelerate and help with the decomposition of the wood material, worried that it might bind up nutrients. The picture early in the slides of the wheat in December, it looks a little chlorotic and yellowish. That's since gone away when we were a couple months later. So when we were there last month, I believe. So that was kind of a preventative application of nitrogen, though it looks from our soils analysis, maybe it was a good thing to do once we got the results back from that. So you can see there's a little yellowish look there. That's pretty much gone away currently. So anyway, so we're still learning. That's observational, and we're getting the analysis done to look at those questions.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing anything pop in here.
Oh, Brian's got one.
Where's that? How available is restoration equipment and contractors in today and in the future when biomass plantings would be developed? In the Willamette Valley and in the Pacific Northwest through the Mid-Columbia Basin, contractors are readily available to do the restoration type work. They have the medium to large size equipment that's readily available, provided you have the funds to bring that heavy equipment in and operate across your ground. In areas like Pilchuck, north of Seattle, we're still going to probably have to investigate what might be available locally. Worst case, we would bring the fellow up from the Willamette Valley. Rick, is that what we would do?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
So I think equipment's pretty much relatively available. It might vary from area to area what's commonly used in dealerships.
Yeah.
On a large scale plantation, the contractors will get what you need if they have regular work to do. So that's it's been a little bit of a struggle for us, but not really all that bad. So it's just getting to getting in contact with the right people, working things out, and they're a little they're not hesitant. They're a little unsure because it's something they've never done before at this type of scale with this dense of planting. What we did find, which nobody's asked a question about, is the structural root system did not go that deep in any of these sites yet. We didn't have to go all that deep to take care of the structural roots. We wanted to go deep enough if there'd been any hard pan created that you'd from not tilling the soil or not working it or ripping it for 5 or 6 years, make sure that you aren't causing any problems. But we ran real deep in Jefferson trying to bring up more wood, and it wasn't there after about 8 or 9 inches deep. So
interesting. And in Columbus, the selection of the smaller equipment was driven by the fact that the larger equipment just wasn't in the area. And that's why the smaller heads were used there. We probably could have or might have chosen to bring in a larger mulcher for some of that material, but the small equipment seems to be doing the job at this point. Patricia's asking, what did you learn about the cost of doing the restoration? Is it more or less than you expected? How much time does it take? It has proven to be more costly than some of our initial estimates. We were thinking that initially that much of the restoration post-harvest could be taken with conventional agricultural equipment, heavy discs that would turn up the roots and fracture and cut up the stumps. That has proven to be not 100% successful, but the mulching machines definitely do a much better job, but at a higher price. If I had to estimate what the cost might be now, I would say it's in, correct me if I'm wrong here, Rick, in the $400 to $600 range to bring in the heavy equipment, run it over to the point that you saw that could be handed over to the discs to finish to do the site finishing.
That's in the right range. Part of our cost analysis on this, I think we're entering new ground for most of these guys, so we probably were a little bit hampered on a large scale operation. If we're going to come back with more property to do, I think we'd get cost reductions from most of our contractors. Yeah. We also, on all 3 sites that we restored so far, did not have a complete harvest, so we had to deal with standing trees as well as stumps, which complicates the matters and necessitated a mulching type machine and not be able to try just conventional ag equipment. Yep. Because you have 20 rows of harvested trees, 20 rows of standing trees, and things like that. So
yeah, as far as the time it takes, the mulchers and so forth, about an acre an hour, half an acre to an acre an hour.
Acre an hour.
Acre an hour.
So you can do the whole process fairly quickly.
Yep.
Mostly it would be weather conditions and equipment availability which would hamper that thing. But I think you could restore a stand within, unless it's 10,000 acres, but 100 acres, you shouldn't have any problem doing it in 2 to 3 weeks if you had things lined up logistically.
Yeah.
So
yes, the cost is in the range of $400 to $600 an acre. That's an answer to another question that just popped in.
And a lot of the cost is driven too by what you want to do with it next. Our pill chuck cost is going to go back to just overseed with grass. It's probably going to be considerably lower. It's not intensively farmed, wasn't intensively farmed before, and it's pasture land. So the higher intensity crop or farming method you have next is probably going to drive your cost higher because you want finer soils. If you want to drill seed, you may have to add a little bit more rather than overseed the first year. So,
yeah, you're definitely not going to follow poplars with a below ground crop like sugar beets or potatoes or something like that. it's going to have to be a crop that can be harvested above ground.
Yeah, it'll cost you more to get to that point. You can do that.
I believe it. I believe it's fair to say it would be unreasonable cost to expect that, and that you should look at an above ground crop for at least 1 year, as the fella in Jefferson, Oregon is doing, where he's planting wheat, and then he'll plow all that back up and then see what it looks like for his subsequent crops. At the Boardman Tree Farm, restoration work of those acres, the vast majority of it was planted to corn immediately following the restoration, even though the prime use for some of that land over there is for growing potatoes. Okay. If it was after 20 years and you wanted to replant a new stock of poplar, would you use the same process? Would we go back in to reestablish poplars to replant, or would we use the same equipment and the same process?
No, you could replant poplar much cheaper, I believe. Okay. So
would you go in between the existing rows?
Plant between the existing rows, and you would have probably a fallow year where you'd have to let the pre-existing crop sprout up enough you can kill it, so you don't have so you keep your varieties pure, and then replant in the old alleyways. So yeah. I'd love to see us get that far and actually have to test that. All right, Noelle, are you still there? She's on mute. Okay. Is there anything you want to say to wrap up the time? We got more time for a couple more questions if someone wants to ask that. Otherwise, we can let people get back to their regular workday.
No, just thank you to Rick and Rich. That was a great presentation, and I really enjoyed all the videos. If you enjoyed this presentation and you want to see it again, we will be posting it on our website, hardwoodbiofuels.org. We have an archive of all of our previous webinars, and this one will be joining it. If you have more questions for Rick and Rich, I'm sure they are more than happy to answer them. Right now if you have them, or if it comes up later, feel free to email me and I will pass on your questions. Or if you already have contact information for Rick and Rich, you can reach out to them. So yeah, thank you, Rick and Rich. I really appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. And
you bet.
Thank you to the AHB Extension team for actually conducting the interviews with the landowners, and that was well done.
Yeah, Kat and I really enjoyed getting a chance to speak to the landowners and the farmers. It was great to see their positive response to how AHB went.
Yes, I agree.
Yep.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you all.